All right, Edward Lucas joins me from London. Edward is a candidate for the Liberal Democrats in Westminster, and he is also a well-known writer and security analyst. Hi, Edward.
Hello.
Incredible days as Prime Minister Boris Johnson came under all of this pressure to resign. And a lot of people said, like former President Trump, kind of refused to go initially.
Yes, incredible days, incredible hours, incredible minutes. We are glued to our phones and to our televisions and our radios. And we think at the moment, as I'm talking to you, Boris Johnson seems to be wanting to stay on as a caretaker Prime Minister in Downing Street while the Conservatives elect a new leader. But some of his MPs are saying, no, you've got to go right now.
Isn't that normal for a British Prime Minister to stay until the party has time, and sometimes that takes months, to select a replacement?
Yes, and Theresa May announced that she was going, she was resigning and there would be Conservative leadership, but she wasn't so controversial as Boris Johnson. Your viewers may remember that her premiership was shipwrecked on the inability to get the Brexit deal through, but it wasn't the same sort of moral crisis that's hanging over the Johnson administration. And I think that the Conservative MPs are both trying to weigh up who's going to be the next leader and where they should position themselves on that, but also trying to minimize the damage to the party caused by the eviction of Boris Johnson. And they are all plotting like mad at the moment, trying to work out what to do. And there's a distinct lack of clarity.
In the end, why did Boris Johnson have to go?
The old-fashioned phrase moral turpitude, I think, would fit it, that he had a systematic disregard for the truth, for the rules, for the conventions of human behavior. He was driven by an enormous ambition dating back to when he was a kid, and he said, I want to be world king, a streak perhaps of narcissism, and he just would never fit in with the written and unwritten conventions and rules of how this political system's meant to work. And in the end, it caught up with him. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time.
Straight out lied about parties in Downing Street, lied about an MP who sexually assaulted, is the allegation, not once, but when Boris Johnson was the foreign minister, it was brought to his attention that this man had another incident where he, with allegations of some kind of sexual assault. And despite that, Boris Johnson allowed him to be appointed the deputy party whip, correct?
That's correct. So the final scandal that came on so many others was to do with a man called Chris Pincher, who was the deputy whip, which is a sort of role in the British Parliament that combines enforcing party discipline, but also looking after the welfare of the members of Parliament. And it was claimed that the Prime Minister had no knowledge of some serious allegations that had been made about Mr. Pincher in the past. And what really led to his downfall was when the former head of the Foreign Office, the civil servant who'd been running the Foreign Office, issued a statement saying actually there'd been serious allegations about Mr. Pincher when Mr. Pincher was a junior Foreign Office minister, and that Mr. Johnson had been told about these allegations. They resulted in Pincher apologising, and he then stopped being a minister. But it was quite untrue for Boris Johnson to say he had no idea. And this just compounded a number of other things where he'd apparently joked that Pincher was a bit handsy, which is a sort of British euphemism for being a sort of mild sexual assault. And he'd also blamed the MPs, said if only the MPs had managed to get Mr. Pincher's drinking in check. We should say Mr. Pincher's apologized for getting
drunk. I have to interrupt you here because it's really an important point, and I think somebody focused on it yesterday in a committee hearing where she said, you're giving excuses to somebody who sexually assaulted people because you're saying that there are some drinking problems in your party. I mean, the idea that all of this is okay just because people had drinks says a lot about the character and moral judgment of Boris Johnson.
Well, it also says something about the character of life at Westminster and indeed in Downing Street, that there is I mean, there are many legislatures are either dry or places where drunkenness is unusual. The House of Commons and House of Lords is unusual in having restaurants and bars sort of built into the physical fabric and a culture of drinking built into the social fabric. So there are plenty of opportunities, things to go wrong. But you're absolutely right. This starts from 2017 when Chris Pincher was first a whip, and he was fired after allegations of unwanted hands-on massages. He was then brought back into government by Boris Johnson into the Foreign Office. He was then made a housing minister, then a deputy chief whip. And the whip's office was informed at the time that Pincher had been made an unwanted pass at another man. Then he gets drunk in 2022 in June at an event in a private club in London, apologizes and resigns. And then it turns out that Boris actually had known about this all along. And that's the just the latest in a whole series of evasions and dishonesties and brushes with propriety that have just characterized his career since his early days as a journalist.
I can't help but look at some of this a bit cynically, because we've been watching how some of the conservative cabinet members have resigned, but a lot of them even accepted, including the chancellor, accepted a new post. And then kind of when they read the writing on the wall that Boris Johnson may not survive, they put out these letters and tweets saying, that it's time for him to go. But up until the last minute, for the sake of power, a lot of them were willing to accept anything that he did.
Yes, ambition is a very powerful drug, and not only for Boris Johnson, but for other people. And the thought of being a minister was very appealing. And the government payroll vote, if you include the members of the cabinet, the junior ministers, the so-called parliamentary private secretaries, who are the sort of lowest rung on the ladder, that's 100+ jobs, and people go into politics so they want to make a difference and exercise power. And if you keep your nose clean and suck up to the leadership, then you may get one of those jobs, and if you don't, you won't. So I think he's given the toxicity of the atmosphere at the top of government, he's actually managed to attract some quite heavyweight figures into government, but even they, crazed by ambition though they may have been, in the end had enough. And I think the really important thing about Boris Johnson is he has almost no personal loyalties. Most politicians have a bunch of people who they look out for, those people look out for them, and that's the kind of the home team. And Boris Johnson doesn't have that. He doesn't inspire loyalty. Anyone who trusts him ends up regretting it. So it makes the situation, the position, quite unstable. But once people start deserting him, nobody wants to be Boris's last friend. You don't want to stay on the sinking ship with the captain when everyone else has got in the lifeboat.
Or as the opposition leader put it yesterday, this is the first case where the sinking ships are deserting the rat.
Yes, one could also say that the lifeboats are very crowded. I mean, I'm surprised. He has apparently announced that there's going to be he's completed appointments to put a full cabinet in, and of course, for people who seem to be able to having it both ways, they're saying, I want Boris Johnson to resign. He's not fit to be prime minister, but I'm happy to serve in his government, at least for now. So this is pushing the conventions of British politics hard in a previously untried direction.
What is the danger of Boris Johnson staying on for months as a caretaker prime minister?
Well, I think he feels that so long as he's in Downing Street, he's got options, and once he's out, he doesn't. There's also the question of whether he might call a snap general election. He does have some powers to do this. He can go to the Queen and say, I want you to dissolve Parliament, and he could then go to the country on a back me or sack me platform. The question is, would the Queen allow this? And it would put her, as a supposedly non-political figure, in a difficult position, because she might say to him, no, I'm going to ask someone else to form a government who has a majority in the House of Commons. She might go back to Theresa May, the former Prime Minister, and ask her to do it on a caretaker basis. But we are in absolutely uncharted waters constitutionally on this. There's also a suggestion the Queen might just refuse to see Mr. Johnson, and therefore get away, dodge the decision that way. But there's no doubt he has one card left to play, which is to try and call a general election, disastrous though that might be for the Conservative Party. And it may be he's going to threaten them with that for a bit.
Do you think he would break his word? He would be able to do that, that he would say, I'm going to be a caretaker prime minister until the Conservative Party, my party, it's his party, elects a new leader, and then he could suddenly do a 180-degree turn and do that?
I don't think you do that. No, I think what he might do is say say that we're in a situation of national crisis and we haven't got time for a leadership election right now. We need a general election, and it would be just devastating for the Conservative Party, and they're saying no, don't do it. But that's the one card he's got left to play. I don't quite see how it ends well for him, but it would end very badly for the Conservative Party. So it's a bit like he's got a hand grenade there, and he's saying, "Come any closer, and I'll pull the pin."
Last question to you on international affairs. You know, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, if he writes his own political epitaph today, will be saying that he was a great addition and that he did wonderful things on the international stage. Do you think, when you look at Northern Ireland, when you look at Britain's relationship with the rest of Europe, there's only pluses in seeing Boris Johnson leave the political stage?
I think that the overwhelming verdict on his premiership will be missed opportunities. He has got a few things right. He was keen on supporting Ukraine from the beginning, although I believe he did that only to distract attention from his troubles at home. I think that the damage he's done to Britain's international reputation by trashing our adherence to international agreements, particularly the Northern Ireland Protocol, and picking pointless fights with the EU on that and other issues looks very bad in retrospect. And Britain is a very serious partner in Europe when it comes to military security, intelligence, defence, as well as economy. And under Boris Johnson, we're punching below our weight rather than above our weight, because there's a kind of Johnson discount, which means that other politicians, other European leaders don't really want to hang out with him very much. And we have a small number of countries. Ukraine is one, Estonia is another, who would be very close to Britain in defence terms. So they're willing to make time for him. But I think there will be an enormous sigh of relief in capitals all across the world if they thought that Boris isn't coming anymore.
Edward Lucas, great to talk to you. Thank you, Edward.
My pleasure.